Welcome to our channel. Before we get started, please consider liking and subscribing so we can bring more stories like this to you. I never thought I'd find myself recounting this nightmare, but I'm doing so for two reasons: to vent, and to warn anyone else who might be in a similar predicament. My name is Gordon, and I'm 64 years old. I'm not in perfect health. Arthritis in my knees has made walking a daily challenge, so I use a cane most of the time. For me, a stable, ground-floor apartment is essential. Finding one in my small suburban town was no easy feat still. I thought I'd struck gold when I came across a cozy, two-room unit managed by a woman I'll call Karen. At first glance, the place seemed perfect: quiet neighborhood, a small yard where I could sit in the sunshine, and an interior layout that was easy on my knees. Karen struck me as strict but polite at the initial viewing, meticulous about cleanliness, adamant about wanting a respectful tenant. She even gave me the typical landlord spiel: "We like to treat everyone like family here, so feel free to knock on our door if you ever need anything." It almost felt too good to be true. In hindsight, that was my first red flag. She seemed overeager. She emphasized how proud she was of her property, how involved she stayed in every tenant's business to keep the place up to standard. I'm used to landlords who check in once in a while, not daily. But I needed the apartment so badly. I'd been on multiple waiting lists for senior-friendly housing, all with months-long delays. So, with more optimism than I should have had, I signed the lease and moved in. The first few days went as smoothly as one could hope. Karen greeted me each morning. "Good morning, Gordon," she'd say in that sing-song voice, glancing at her watch if I was leaving the apartment even a minute later than usual. At first, I attributed this to neighborly cheer. She'd drop random remarks about my trash bin location, or ask why my curtains were drawn at certain times. "Just making sure everything's all right," she'd chirp. Strange, yes, but I brushed it off. The third week brought a few less innocent surprises. My homemaid, Charlotte, visits twice a week to help me with groceries, heavy cleaning, and any errands requiring more physical stamina. On her second visit, Charlotte parked her small hatchback in the driveway. Karen wasted no time marching up in a rage, insisting that no visitors were allowed to park in her spot. We both apologized and explained that Charlotte was just unloading groceries. Karen, however, responded with a lecture: "I don't like people taking advantage of my generosity. Don't park there again." The driveway wasn't even marked as private. There was plenty of space. But I told Charlotte to park on the street from then on, even though that meant lugging groceries an extra 20 yards for me. I had a sinking feeling, but told myself I could manage. Tensions escalated when Karen began popping in without notice. The first time, it was early morning. I opened my door to find her standing in my tiny foyer, studying my living room. "Just checking the smoke detector," she claimed. But she had no tools, no new batteries, nothing. She looked flustered, like she was caught red-handed. After that, I started locking the chain whenever I was home, but she'd knock persistently until I answered. On more than one occasion, I'd hear her jostling the doorknob, as though testing to see if it was locked. One day, she cornered me in the hallway, almost scolding me for what she claimed was a funky smell. She said it must be coming from my unit. I explained I'd heated up soup for dinner. "If you could keep it less pungent," she insisted. "I have a sensitive nose." I tried to be reasonable, but the complaints kept piling on. She wanted the blinds open at specific times, demanded I swap out certain LED bulbs that messed with the ambience of the complex, and scolded me about yard decor. My small wind chime was apparently too noisy. The final straw of that first month was a note she left pinned to my door: "I've had several complaints. Please refrain from wearing heavy cologne or lotions. The entire hallway stinks." The building had only 6 units, and I'd never worn aftershave a day in my life. I felt singled out, but had no immediate recourse. Legally, I didn't think there was much I could do about these petty requests, especially since she was the property owner. But the gut feeling that something bigger was brewing grew stronger. With every passing day, Karen seemed to cast me as a troublemaker, even though I'd done everything I could to follow the rules. Though I was tempted to move, I didn't have the finances or the energy for another relocation. And I couldn't risk living somewhere with stairs or a layout that might aggravate my arthritis. So I tried to keep the peace. I tiptoed around the property, avoided strong-smelling foods, and even stopped inviting friends over. Yet no matter what I did, Karen found reasons to intrude. I learned, the hard way, that living under the watchful eye of a so-called Karen was the beginning of a long, grueling battle I was in no shape to fight. Little did I know, the storm was about to intensify in ways I never imagined. By the time I'd been there a month and a half, I was sleeping with one eye open, figuratively, at least. Karen's unannounced visits and unwarranted accusations only got worse, and I was starting to suspect she had an obsession with controlling tenants. One evening, Charlotte came by to help me set up a medical alert system my daughter insisted I install. We'd barely managed to plug it in when the door swung open. Karen, yet again, barged in under the pretense of checking the ventilation system. As if on cue, she started peppering me with questions. What's that device? Is it going to cause any interference? Is this authorized? Charlotte was polite but firm. You can't just come in here without giving notice, she told Karen. That set Karen off. She glared at Charlotte as if she'd never been so insulted. I don't need to be told what to do in my own building, she snapped. For a moment, I was sure we were going to see a meltdown, complete with yelling and name-calling. Instead, Karen strode off, huffing and muttering about disrespectful aides. The next morning, I found a typed letter taped to my door. Karen claimed I was violating the lease by bringing unauthorized medical equipment onto the property and that it was a fire hazard. The letter threatened eviction if I didn't remove it. The device was no bigger than a phone charger. It was specifically designed for seniors, with no risk of overloading an outlet. I'd had enough. That day, I decided to consult a friend who used to volunteer at a local tenants' rights group. She advised me to read my lease carefully and look up local housing laws. She also suggested documenting everything, taking photos, writing down each interaction, even saving Karen's notes. According to her, if Karen was harassing me or illegally entering my unit, I might have a case. So I started my paper trail. I kept a small notebook by the door. Every time Karen knocked or tried to enter, I noted the date, time, and what she said. Meanwhile, Charlotte began parking a block away just to avoid confrontations. None of it slowed Karen down. A week later, she took her campaign to a new level. Around 7:30 a.m., I was in the kitchen pouring my morning coffee when I heard frantic banging on my door. When I opened it, Karen stood there with 2 police officers behind her. My heart practically leaped out of my chest. I thought something horrible had happened. Then Karen pointed an accusatory finger at me. There's an unlicensed person living here, she declared, nodding toward Charlotte's car in the distance. My stomach dropped as I realized she must have waited until Charlotte arrived for her scheduled day. He's allowing suspicious individuals to occupy his apartment, and I want them removed. One officer looked me up and down, taking in my cane and pajamas. He seemed more bewildered than alarmed. I calmly explained, that's my home aide. I'm on a disability arrangement through my insurance. She helps me with groceries and cleaning. She doesn't live here. Karen began rattling off nonsense about illegal subletting, waving her arms around like she was delivering a performance. The second officer quietly asked if Charlotte had a license. Yes, she's certified through a caregiving agency, I replied, fetching Charlotte's credentials from my kitchen table. After a moment, the officer nodded, looked at Karen, and said, there's no violation here. Karen's cheeks turned bright red. She tried to save face by claiming there had been a misunderstanding, but the officers didn't look amused. They walked away shaking their heads. Karen stared daggers at me, as if I were the one who'd embarrassed her. Next time, let me know who you're bringing in, she hissed. She then stomped down the hallway, leaving me trembling with anger. I realized I could no longer ignore the fact that Karen was actively trying to set me up for eviction, or maybe looking to scare me into leaving so she could charge a higher rent to the next tenant. I decided I was done playing defense. I made a few phone calls, one to the local tenants' rights hotline, and another to my friend with the volunteer experience. Both times, I recounted the police incident. I was told that was textbook harassment and strongly advised to file a formal complaint. But part of me hesitated. If Karen already had no qualms about calling the police on me, What would she do when she found out I was lodging a complaint against her? My finances were tight, and I worried that, even if I won, I'd lose in the long run by being forced out. I knew seniors in my position often face uphill battles in housing disputes. Still, I also knew I couldn't keep living in fear. Later that evening, I contacted Charlotte to ask if she'd be willing to write a statement about everything she'd witnessed. Without hesitation, she agreed. "I've never seen anything like this in my 6 years of helping seniors," she told me. Her willingness to stand up for me gave me the push I needed. In a small step toward self-preservation, I started drafting a complaint. Little did I know, Karen's antics had only begun. In the days following the police incident, Karen escalated her campaign of intimidation. She began sneaking around my window at odd hours. Sometimes I'd catch her silhouette lingering on the other side of my curtains. At first, I tried to dismiss it as paranoia. After all, the entire property had a shared yard. But she made no attempt to hide. One night around 9, I peered outside and saw her standing there, arms folded, just staring up at my window. When I opened it to ask if something was wrong, she scurried away without a word. I had become anxious to the point that even the slightest noise made me jump. My knees ached more from the stress. Charlotte advised me again to report this behavior, but I worried about how the police would react. She was the landlord, and as she'd shown before, she knew how to play the victim. Another friend suggested installing a small security camera near my entrance, just to document any unannounced visits or attempts to break in. I was worried Karen would spot it and smash it to pieces, but I also felt that protecting myself was more important than her potential backlash. The final push came one weekend morning when Karen showed up in the backyard with a clipboard and tape measure, claiming she needed to measure the siding for repairs. She asked me to open my windows and hold them a certain way so she could check the frames. Confused, I obliged. Within minutes, she was yelling that I was doing it wrong, and marched into my kitchen. She insisted she needed to remove the window screens to measure properly. Suddenly, she was rummaging around my countertops, opening cabinet doors, checking my refrigerator. "Karen, stop. What are you doing?" I demanded, voice shaking. She turned to me with an uncanny calm, as if I were the intruder. "I'm looking for anything that might be blocking the vents," she stated. "This place could be a fire hazard." Her tone dripped with condescension, as if I were a child who couldn't keep a safe home. I lost my temper. I said, "You have no right to snoop through my personal items. Either leave now or I'm calling the police." That was the first time I'd ever threatened her with legal action, and it changed her demeanor instantly. She straightened up, slapped the tape measure onto the counter, and said, "Try me. Go ahead." I'd never been so furious or scared, but I dialed 911. When the officers arrived, I showed them around, pointed out how she'd forced her way in, rummaging through my cabinets. Karen denied everything, of course. She acted appalled that I would lie about her. The officers looked exasperated, like they'd stumbled into a dispute they didn't want to handle. They asked if there was any physical damage or forced entry. I told them no, I'd opened the door because she claimed she was doing repairs. Karen quickly jumped in. "See? He let me in willingly." She told the officers I'd invited her to measure inside. She gave them the same old line about concerns for safety and looking out for my tenant. Without tangible proof of wrongdoing, they said it was a civil matter. They recommended we resolve it through conversation or, if necessary, the courts. Then they left. I nearly broke down. I felt helpless. Karen saw this as her victory, flashing a smug smirk before striding out. I called my daughter in tears, explaining the situation. That was the final straw for my family. My daughter insisted we contact a lawyer. She even offered to help pay for the initial consultation. I still worried about the fallout but recognized we needed a real, legal approach. So we hired a local attorney who had experience with landlord-tenant disputes and elder law. At our first meeting, I explained everything: the incessant harassment, the police calls, her rummaging through my home, and the intimidation attempts. The lawyer nodded sympathetically, scribbling notes. "She's committing blatant harassment and violating your tenant rights. Entering without notice is illegal in many states without an emergency. We have more than enough grounds to file a complaint and request a restraining order if necessary, she said. Hearing those words was both a relief and a wake-up call. Part of me still felt uneasy about the potential retaliation. But my lawyer explained we could request that Karen only communicate in writing or through her counsel to prevent further face-to-face harassment. So we moved forward. My lawyer sent Karen a formal letter detailing the violations and demanding an immediate end to her unlawful behavior. We also filed a report with the local housing authority. In the letter, we made it clear that any more unauthorized entries or harassment would lead to legal action. My heart raced the day we sent it off, but I also felt a small, liberating spark of hope. Maybe this would scare her off. Maybe she'd realize she couldn't push me around. Maybe I'd finally be able to live in peace. But Karen's reaction was, unsurprisingly, aggressive. Within a week, I received a notice, typed in all bold letters, claiming that I was in default of my lease for various infractions, and that I had 30 days to vacate unless I cured them. She listed absurd accusations, causing undue wear and tear, keeping unapproved medical devices, and unlawful modifications. It was a blatant retaliation letter. My lawyer told me not to be alarmed because most of her claims lacked evidence, and in our jurisdiction, she couldn't simply evict someone for these reasons without giving them a chance to address the issues, which were completely fabricated anyway. Still, it hurt to see her stoop to outright lies just to get me out. And I couldn't shake the anxiety. My lease was month to month now, so even if I won a legal battle, she might not renew. That fear weighed heavily, especially as an older adult with limited housing options. But the situation had escalated beyond anything I could handle alone, and I couldn't keep letting her push me around. We were headed for a legal showdown. I just prayed I wouldn't lose my home in the process. With my attorney leading the charge, we formally responded to Karen's notice, refuting each baseless claim. We made it clear that if she tried to proceed with eviction based on those flimsy accusations, we'd meet her in court. Days turned into weeks of tense silence. Occasionally, I'd catch Karen in the hallway, glaring at me. She also plastered new rules on the community bulletin board in the lobby, things like no personal visitors after 6 p.m. and absolutely no unauthorized equipment. I could see her petty attempts to make life miserable, not just for me but for all tenants. One neighbor, a widowed retiree, confided in me that Karen had started scolding her for leaving her walker in the hall for a moment. It was a pattern. She preyed on older or vulnerable tenants who wouldn't fight back. But I was fighting back now, and I think it unnerved her. One morning, I woke to a frantic banging on the door. Expecting another confrontation, I grabbed my phone to record. To my surprise, it was a representative from the local housing authority, there to inspect the property following my complaint. She had official forms in hand and politely asked to check my living space for any code violations. Karen stood behind her, arms crossed, scowling. Despite my nerves, I let the official in and explained all my concerns: the unauthorized entries, the intimidation, the claims of fire hazards. The official patiently listened, took pictures of the locks, the windows, everything. When she spoke to Karen, it was in the hallway, out of earshot. I couldn't hear what was said, but Karen's face turned from red to white in the span of about 30 seconds. By the time the representative left, Karen wouldn't even look at me. That afternoon, my lawyer called to say that Karen's attorney had reached out, suggesting an out-of-court settlement to avoid further escalation. My lawyer explained that typically, landlords who know they are in violation will try to settle quietly, especially if they fear fines or official scrutiny. The suggestion was that I could remain in the property for the duration of my lease, or a set period, without interference, or Karen would pay me a certain sum if I agreed to vacate voluntarily. It was hush money, basically. I took a day to think it over. Part of me wanted to stand my ground. I didn't like being pushed out of a place I'd just barely made my home. On the other hand, the stress was affecting my health. I wasn't sleeping well, my arthritis flare-ups had worsened, and the anxiety attacks left me exhausted. In speaking with my daughter and Charlotte, we all agreed that no amount of legal victory was worth risking my health, especially if Karen continued to find new ways to harass me. If she wanted me gone so desperately, maybe I should take the money and find somewhere else, somewhere that wouldn't deteriorate my sanity. My lawyer helped negotiate the terms. Ultimately, we arrived at a settlement. Karen would pay me a modest lump sum to cover my moving expenses, plus a portion of my rent for the next 2 months while I searched for a new place. In return, I'd vacate by a specific date and drop any claims of harassment. My lawyer arranged everything in writing. Despite the bitterness I felt, I forced myself to see the bright side. I'd have a chance to secure a better living situation, hopefully a place that was truly senior-friendly and free from overbearing landlords. The last few weeks at Karen's property were tense but quiet. She mostly kept to herself, probably on her attorney's orders. I steered clear of her, focusing on packing and dealing with logistics. My daughter helped me tour a small apartment complex that specialized in senior housing, fully ground-floor units with wheelchair ramps and a shuttle service to grocery stores. Miraculously, they had an opening. I signed the paperwork and felt an immense weight lift off my chest. On move-out day, Karen watched from her porch as Charlotte and my daughter loaded the moving van. She didn't say a word, just observed with that piercing stare. I'll admit, I was tempted to deliver a sarcastic remark or rub my settlement in her face, but I resisted. I wanted no further drama. As we drove off, I let out a long breath I'd been holding for months. I wish I could say that everything was sunshine and roses afterward, but it was more of a cautious relief. I still feel a pang of anger at how I was treated. People like Karen rarely face real consequences for their actions, especially if they have the financial means to pressure tenants out. I do feel lucky, though, that I stood up for myself. Many other seniors or disabled tenants might not have known their rights or had the support to fight back. In my new home, I've experienced something close to peace for the first time since this saga began. No more random knocks at the door, no more police visits, no more accusations of illegal subletting. I've shared my story with a few neighbors here, some of whom have had their own encounters with overzealous landlords. It's sad how common it is. If there's any takeaway from my ordeal, it's that you have to document everything and reach out for help when you're being harassed. There are housing laws designed to protect tenants, yes, even us older folks on fixed incomes, and sometimes just being willing to fight back is enough to get a bully to back down. If you find yourself dealing with a Karen who thinks she can micromanage your life, remember my story. You may have more power than you realize. I'm grateful I got out with minimal damage, physically and mentally. As for Karen, I suspect she'll keep being a nightmare for whoever else rents from her, but at least now, there's a record of her behavior on file. I've also found a bit of solace in telling my tale, hoping it encourages others in my position to demand the respect and decency they deserve. Because no one, especially those of us battling health issues and mobility challenges, should have to endure that kind of harassment in what's supposed to be their home. It may not be the ending I'd envisioned, but it's the one I can live with, and for that, I'm finally at peace.